Property Question Time with me, Emily Evans. This is a show where you get to ask your property questions to our panel of experts. And today I have with me Andrew Wynne-Jones from Simple Landlords Insurance, Joanna Leggett, co-owner of Leggett Immobilia, and Ian Lochery, owner and CEO of Camerons. Right, so first question's for you, Andrew. I've bought a property in Europe and need to insure it. Can my UK insurance company provide this for me? And if so, can I get a deal for insuring two houses with the same company?
Most UK insurers will be able to provide some form of insurance for a property in Europe, but you are restricting the number of companies that will. So the companies that you see advertised on Compare the Market or you see on the internet, typically on mainstream insurers prefer risks in the UK, so you are limiting the number of insurers that will cover you, but there will be some insurers out there that will be able to provide that cover.
And how can we find these insurers?
Well, the best thing to do really is to speak to a local high street broker or to do some Google searching, see who comes up on the rankings. So there will be specialists out there that you can speak to. Turning to the point about whether you get a discount, again, it depends on the insurer. A lot of companies will start to discount once you get to 3 or more properties. But because this is quite specialist, just having 2 properties might not be enough to trigger a property-related discount.
So you just get saving for a third property?
Absolutely.
Or perhaps insuring the country itself, because you may find that that's much cheaper, because they are quite, the insurances, particularly in France, are very cheap because very low crime rates.
Ah, brilliant. How would they do that? Online?
Yeah, it's quite simple. You can ask your local agent that's dealing with your property sale. You can go online. You can go to property fairs where you'll find insurance companies there that insure properties in Europe. And I think you probably will find it's cheaper and more cost effective to do it that way.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
You can also, if you, in Spain particularly, have a word with the solicitor. He will have a bank of insurers that may very well be able to help.
Brilliant. So again, consulting specialists within their field and in the areas. Lovely, thank you. So next question's for you, Joanna. I have a semi-detached neighbour. The other day, he knocked at the door to ask if I wanted to sell him 2 of my 4 empty rooms at the back of his part of the house. I surround him at the back and the side. I would never sell, but he made the suggestion that an alternative would be to convert his part of the loft. I would be against this. My question is, if he wanted to build upwards into the loft, he would need to do so on our party wall, presumably. Would he need my permission?
That's a really complex and complicated question. It happens a lot in France. There's a thing that's known as flying freehold, which means that somebody's bathroom could be across somebody else's living room. Plots of land could be at the end of somebody else's garden. There's all sorts of different things that we probably don't have in the UK and probably would never happen there. I would take advice, have a look at the Act when you bought the property. Is there a flying freehold? Is he able to do this? In whatever situation, I try not to fall out with the neighbours because obviously that's, try to find a solution. If it's literally just going into a loft that already exists, even though there's a wall between the 2 properties, he doesn't need permission for that because you can do any internal works to a property without permission, providing there's new openings. But obviously he's going to have to put in Velux windows or something like this. So in that respect, he is going to need permission. But I would definitely go and see a notaire and speak to the prefecture, which is the planning office, and get some advice before you go back to your neighbour and then say whether you're against it or for it. If you are against it, he could possibly take it to court to say that he wants to change that, but you'd probably try to avoid those type of situations. If it's not going to really affect your property by him just being in the loft, then I would, agree to it. If it's going to make a serious, it's going to seriously affect your property, then obviously try and have some discussions about it or see the planning office.
I suppose they really need to think about it because at the end of the day, you don't want to fall out with your neighbour, do you?
No, of course not.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Right, next question is for you, Ian. We are considering renting a 1-bedroom apartment in Spain for the summer, either on the Costa del Sol or Costa Blanca. I want it to be close to the sea and on a bus route as we do not want to hire a car. Roughly, what should we expect to pay for a decent 1-bedroom apartment which must have a good-sized balcony or room terrace?
Well, that is a big question, to be honest with you, because there are luxury apartments on the Costa del Sol that overlook the sea, and they are really luxurious, and you can pay up to £2,000 a week for one of those. So, or you can go further up to Costa Blanca, and you can get an apartment for maybe 700-800 euros a week. So there is a complete disparity, although it really is down to, when you say one-bedroom apartment, what are the facilities within that one-bedroom apartment. Some facilities will have gymnasiums, they'll have indoor swimming as well as outdoor swimming. Well, obviously they're much more. So there is a complete variance of rates, and there's not one specific rate per apartment in any block.
Costa del Sol or the Costa Blanca?
Costa del Sol is more expensive to live, frankly. Cups of coffee are much more expensive than the Costa Blanca. And just generally, it is more expensive. But clients are quite happy to pay that if they're prepared to pay £2,000 a week for a luxurious apartment. So again, it's who wants to pay, they will pay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. Right, okay, so just to finish off, we have a golden nugget from you, Andrew.
Yes, and it really is quite an obvious one. But when you are shopping for insurance, shop around. Don't buy on price alone. 86% of landlords buy purely on price. And we find that only 13% of landlords actively shop around. So if you can shop around, you can save money. Look at the optional extras that are available to you. Understand what covers they offer you. So you'll find that some landlords will have extras that they can never claim on. So they might have boiler cover, and their boiler might be too old or the wrong type of boiler. So there might be an oil as opposed to a gas boiler. So understand the triggers in a policy, if you like. And also look at the extras that could add value. So things like rent guarantees. So if you need to pay the mortgage with the rent that you're receiving, need to think about protecting that. So rent guarantee is a great optional extra, and only 10% or so of landlords choose that option.
Yeah, rent guarantees are really kind of new in the last few years, isn't it? Because of obviously tenants not paying the rent. Do they pay out? Do insurance companies pay out in the end? What proof do you need for them to be able to pay out on rent guarantee?
The key with rent guarantee really is understanding the conditions when you take the policy out. So you normally need to have a professional reference done on the tenant, and you need to retain that as evidence if you need to make a claim. And usually the tenancy agreement would need to be an assured short-hold tenancy. So really the sticking points on rent guarantee claims are the referencing and the tenancy agreement. So as long as you can tick those two boxes, then you should not find that you have any problems at point of claim.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's all we've got time for now, but bear with us. We will be back after this short break. Welcome back to Property Question Time with me, Emily Evans. I'm joined by three property experts today: Andrew Wynne-Jones, Joanna Leggett and Ian Lochery. Right, we're going to start with a golden nugget from you, Ian.
Right. Okay, this is straightforward for our viewers, but it's quite important, and it's evident that they don't actually necessarily do what they should do. And that is when you're buying a property in Spain, you will see a purchase price. Now, that is not the price that you pay. There will be additional taxes and legal costs to consider. And if it's new, furniture as well. So if someone's going to buy a property in Spain, a new property should be about 15%. You should look to account as an addition, or if it's a resale, probably up to about 12%. So there's a lot to remember. And when you initially look to buy a property, when you're talking to your solicitor, ask them to outline the total cost for you to make sure that you don't necessarily get involved in something that you can't actually afford.
So, Joanna, one for you. We are planning to build a double garage and are struggling through the permit for construction form. It's a lot more complex than the declaration of work we submitted previously for a small shed. We have had a search through and not had much luck finding a guide to completing this form. Any advice on how to complete this form?
Okay, well, the permit de construire is a type of planning permission that can be passed at the mairie, at the mayor's office as such. A declaration de travail, which is just, I've declared that I've put a shed up because you don't actually need planning permission for the shed, is quite different. If it's under 150 square metres, the garage itself, then you can do that at local level again, and you don't actually need an architect's plan. However, I would say if you want to avoid all of these filling out the paperwork yourself, then get a draftsman or an architect involved and they'll put it all through for you at not an expensive cost. Alternatively, I would take some cakes and perhaps a bottle of whiskey into your local mayor's office and get the mayor's clerks, etc., to help you, because they're really helpful, and especially in local villages in the countryside. They'll take you through each step. You'd need to provide a location plan. You'd need to provide photographs, a drawing, which you can, quite easily do yourselves, of where it's going to be situated on the land. Colour photographs, attach those to the form, take it into your local mayor's office. They'll take you through the questions, make sure you've answered everything. You may need a knowledge of French, or you may need somebody who speaks French that could go along with you. And it's a really quite straightforward process.
But if in doubt, get an expert.
If in doubt and you want it to run smoothly, then I would suggest getting an architect or a draftsman in who will do it all for you.
How do costs differ in France compared to the UK with regards to architectural costs?
It really depends. If you're using somebody who's an English speaker or an English architect, they've got to get it stamped by a French architect. If you're using a French architect, then they're similar costs, but probably slightly cheaper.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Right, okay, question for you, Andrew. I'm just about to buy a leasehold flat. What insurance do I need?
A very good question, actually one we get quite a lot. The most important thing really is to speak to your solicitor. Typically what would happen is that the freeholder would be responsible for ensuring the buildings and the structure of the property. And as the leaseholder yourself, you'd be responsible for ensuring your own contents within the property, and you'd probably make a contribution towards the cost of the freeholder's insurance. But all of these things will be detailed in the lease, and it's important that your solicitor makes you aware of exactly what your obligations are.
What about when you've let the property to a tenant?
Well, that will be entirely up to your own risk appetite, really. So you need to consider things like contents insurance. So even if you're letting the property unfurnished, chances are you'll leave white goods in the property. There'll be light fittings, carpets, that sort of thing. You can get either a full contents policy if it's furnished, or if it's unfurnished, you can get what they call a limited contents policy. And that's designed just to cover the basic items that you would leave in an unfurnished flat. But importantly, it would include your liability cover. And this is something that landlords often ask about, actually. It's if the tenant were to injure themselves in the property on something that belongs to you, and if you knew it was faulty, as an example, and if you didn't rectify the issue with the item and it caused them injury or damage, then you could be sued by them. So a basic contents policy is not going to cost you much more than £50–70, but it has that really important element of cover in there.
Because most landlords just do landlord's building insurance and don't think about the contents.
Exactly, and if it's leasehold, you don't need to insure the buildings typically. So some landlords will not actually insure anything, but you need to be aware of your liability risk to the tenant.
So, question for you, Ian. We have a Spanish mortgage for €161,000. However, the value is now €140,000 maximum. We are still attempting to make the mortgage payments, however, are struggling. We would like to start conversation with the bank to hand the property back. However, what should we be thinking before we do this?
Well, negative equity, and of course it has happened to a lot of viewers who have bought properties a number of years ago at the very height of the property prices, and of course they have fallen more recently for resales. So the first thing you'd do would be to speak to your solicitor again. That's the first thing I'd do, rather than go to the bank and say, look, this is what we're proposing to do. Have a proposition. Is it short-term a problem, or is it something that is a situation that they're going to have to sell and look at paying the balance over a period of time with the lender? Lenders are pretty good in Spain at the moment, and I think there might very well be a solution. But my advice personally would be, let's not worry too much about it and sit and put our head in the sand and hope it'll go away. We need to act on it. And the first thing I'd do is speak to probably the solicitor who dealt with the conveyancing, if they're around still, and tell them the situation. Bearing in mind that property prices might very well increase again and take the negative equity away. It's really a matter of of understanding the whole situation with that particular person. But if it goes to the solicitor, they will tell them what the mortgage agreement says, because they are different. So they will be able to then establish what the mortgage agreement says and then be armed before they go and speak to their lender, who I'm fairly sure will be fairly sympathetic.
How do repossessions work in Spain?
Well, they're not dissimilar to England. I mean, to be honest with you, it's a voluntary repossession, and basically they would just say, look, there you go, sorry, we can't afford it, and then the bank would put agents in to try and sell the property at probably much reduced price from the 140,000 that you're talking about, which means that the gap between what they owe and what they're going to sell for is greatly increased. So I would try desperately hard to find a way around this, whether they might be paying capital and interest at the moment, if they could reduce that to just interest only for a period of time. But as I say, the banks are very, very good in Spain, and I think that they're not aggressive. They don't want property back. They've had loads of it over the years. Excuse me. So I think that would be the course of action I would take. Straight to the solicitor, find out exactly where they stand, go to the bank and have some propositions. Rather than just say we want to hand the thing back, try and look at ways around it.
Well, it says here we are still attempting to make the mortgage payments.
Yeah.
Maybe they could take a mortgage holiday.
It depends which bank they're with again. Some are more flexible than others, but they will all want to help them. I'm sure of that. It might be they just want to rent it out. Maybe they're not renting it out. Again, it depends on the location. So there's a number of things we don't know, but I would suggest that the course of action that I've suggested will be the right course of action at that stage.
And yeah, really don't hand it back I suppose if they are struggling with the mortgage payments, that's not a great situation to be in, but if they can hold on to it for longer, hopefully property prices will rise and they'll get themselves into a situation again where it's worth what they paid for it.
Well, it is, and if they've got family members that might want to come in on it, there's a number of opportunities, and if they are struggling but not, they're not completely out of it, so they do have a contribution to the mortgage repayments, I really think they've got to try and work it through. And if they go to the bank and say, this is what we're proposing to do, the chances are the bank might very well help them.
France's mortgage is very similar to UK mortgages as well?
I would say exactly the same as Ian said. All of those scenarios would be the same in France.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. Thank you very much. Right, and to finish, Joanna, we have a golden nugget from you.
Yes, my little tip is inheritance laws. Inheritance laws are very different to those in the UK. They were brought in by Napoleon, who was disinherited as a child. So he brought in the law that you cannot disinherit your children. So this is quite strict, and this is why properties go down hand in hand to members of the family. So when you are looking at buying a property in France, to avoid this or to have the property left to whoever you want to, not necessarily the donkey sanctuary or something like this, because you're going to pay a lot of tax on that, I would always go and see a notaire, because once you've bought the property, you can't change it. So before buying the property, go and see a notaire, sit down, go through the inheritance laws and make sure you leave it set up in the right way of how you want the property or where you want the property to go.
Do they, in France, do you have similar inheritance tax thresholds?
Yes, there are. For children, you can leave them up to €100,000 tax-free. Once you start leaving it anywhere else, you could be paying 65% in tax. So, and although you can now, as a Brit, use an English will to, you want it by English law. However, you can do that and you can leave it to whoever you want by English law. They will still have to pay the tax. And if you think, you're leaving a property and that person, maybe your niece, has to pay 65% inheritance tax, it's quite a lot of money. So I would always suggest a meeting with a notaire to discuss this before you sign for the property.
Blooming inheritance tax.
They're going to get you one way or the other, so you've got to protect it as much as you possibly can. That's why in Spain you must do a will. Husband and wife, purchasers of property, you must do a will, because if one of you die, it doesn't go to the other.
Does it not?
No, it goes to the children. So you have to be very careful and make sure that the lines are absolutely protected.
It's It's really interesting to know, actually, because obviously in the UK it goes to the partner.
Exactly.
So people need to sort out wills when moving to...
It's such an easy thing to do, and you can do it at the same time as you're buying the property.
And a solicitor's quite easy to find over in France and Spain, would you say? Personal recommendation, how would you find a solicitor
In
over
France,
there?
it would just be the notaire, and you could literally do it half an hour before you sign for the property. It's just a clause that goes in the final act, as it's called, which is the completion documents. Really, really simple, and they can advise you. Every situation is going to be different. You might have children from different marriages. So it's a quite simple process, but the notaire is the person that is dealing with the sale that would deal with this as well, and also a will.
Thank you, that was really insightful. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but please do send your questions in to be answered by our panel of experts via our website, www.property-tv.co.uk, or email us at info@property-tv.co.uk. Thank you very much to our panel of experts today, Andrew Wynne-Jones, Joanna Leggett and Ian Lochry. I've been Emily Evans. Thank you and goodbye.